Hello, good evening to our viewers in Indonesia, and a good morning, afternoon to those joining us from other part of the world. It's happy to see you again, all the audience, because it is a new year, 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to PRANKS, Project Management Knowledge Sharing, brought to you by the Project Management Institute Indonesia chapter. My name is Iksan Lukita. You can address me as Luki. I am a program board member of the PMI Indonesia chapter, and I will be your host today. On the behalf of the PMI and the chapter volunteers, I would like to extend our very warm welcome to our speakers and all the attendees tonight. If this is the first time for you to join PRANKS, this is a regular event that we run twice a month. We invite subject matter experts and practitioners to share their knowledge, ideas, and experiences. If you would like to speak at our event, or if you have any suggestions for speakers whom you would like to us to host, do reach out to us through our website or social media channels. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, according to Edmondson 2011 Harvard Business Review article, which is mentioned that the wisdom of learning from failure, it is incontrovertible. Nevertheless, we must not overlook the elements that contributed to success in our previous endeavors itself. Speaking of notable project realizations, we notice even NASA's space shuttle programs, which are supported by sophisticated technology to predict and to calculate every decision they are willing to take, at some level, they are encounter failures. Now, as a project professional, we do not perceive shortcoming in failure as a failure. However, we see it as a challenge for us to tackle. It is important to keep in mind that the factor which is causing failure is not exactly the same for every project. Through better understanding, we have capability to capture the context and to understand every variable which will cause our project's success or will encounter challenges in the futures. This will help us to avoid the blame game for the organizations for learning, and this is also a strategy to learn from the failure effectively. It is evident also for project professionals, a project gives us so many benefits, despite from the economic side itself. However, through project, we also can draw so much valuable lessons, which is able to improve the performance of the project for the next opportunity by understanding the similarity and also the exceptional information from the project. It is also obvious that the insight from valuable past experience will become one of the major factors for the project success. But those statements lead us to another questions. The first one, how we gather lessons. And second, how to tell the pieces of information will give impactful merits to the next future events, because we know that there is a lot of information, but where is the information that is, the most impactful informations, the most relatable information? And the third, or finally, when the appropriate time to collect the data for lesson learned for documentations. And today, to start our new first month of the year in January 2024, we begin our pranks with topic, let's start learning from lessons learned. Joining us from Ohio, United States, is Dave David, thought leader in project management at PMI and PMO coaching. A quick introduction about Dave Davis. He is a co-chair the development of the PMI business analyst at Practice Guide, also recognized as a trailblazer and thought leader at PMI. He is currently work as a senior program manager at Cincinnati Children's Health, creating change management while implementing Workday human capital management. He also advisor on the creation of the PMI community. And for the past experience, he worked as a PMI director, business analyst, project manager, functional manager, and also product owner. He also have worked with General Electric to organize the Agile teams and serve as a change manager for Workday implementation and HR process transformation in a major hospital organizations. And he also a mentor in a University of Dayton for creating Agile toolkit. Okay, so I would like to greeting for our speaker first. Hi, Dave. It is a pleasure to have you with us tonight. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing just fine, and thanks for having me. And the one thing, it may be night where you're at, but it's 7 in the morning and the sun isn't even up here in Ohio. So
Wow, it's 7
we're
morning.
complete opposite end of this clock here, which I think is
Yeah,
great.
it's all right, impressive. So I can see that you are still excited, even though it is very early in your country, right? Okay, so we are thrilled to have you, and we are looking forward for valuable insight during the sessions.
Okay.
But before we start, I just would like to remind our attendees regarding some ground rules during the sessions to preserve the quality of the session. The first one, all the participants will be on mute, and please, all the videos are turned off. And if you have any question, you can submit it to the chat box. Or if you have any preferences to speak with our speakers, please tell us, and we will give you the access to open your mic. And the session will be recorded, and also the certificate will be distributed through your email. And the auto submissions, it is exclusive for the PMI local chapter member only. And the recording session, you will find it in the YouTube channel. And with that, I sincerely hope that you enjoyed the sessions. And now I will hand it over to Dave. Please welcome Dave Davis, the PMI Trailblazer.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And fantastic. I mentioned before we started here, I think this whole concept of just the knowledge share and everything, the pranks, is just a fantastic opportunity for you. And I appreciate the PMI Indonesia chapter even offering such a thing. Main reason why I say that, I've been around a while. I don't know if I'll get into too much of my credentials and everything. I've been certified as a PMP since last century, 1998. I was PMP 10,945. So I've been around a while. Firm believer in continuous learning, continuous growth, and et cetera. And avenues like this are where I get my most learning. I learn from practitioners, and I'll say that right now. I am a practitioner. I'm not a consultant. I'm not an executive or things like that. I'm a guy in there, sleeves rolled up, doing the work. So going to share with you my experiences over the years of lessons learned, some good things and bad things, and et cetera. I'm starting with a quote from one of my favorite books slash movies I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how familiar you are with it in Indonesia, but it's a cult classic. It's a general classic in the States called To Kill a Mockingbird. And one of my lessons learned from there is this quote from a guy who's actually known as Judge Green. And his quote is, people generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. And I think that's important as we talk about lessons learned, because the thing that's most important in lessons, you got to be willing to learn. You got to be open to things. I've seen many sessions where people come in, they've already made up their mind what the lessons learned were, and they just refuse to accept anybody that has any, shall we say, pushback on anything that they perceive, and et cetera. But lessons learned has to be a truly collaborative environment, psychological safety, all those other nice buzzwords at the moment. But they're buzzwords right now, but they've been around forever. But it's important that when you attend as either a facilitator of, a participant in, or just an observer, you need to be open. I like to say, format your mental hard drive and go in there with a completely clear, and be open to other perspectives, have empathy, etc. And if it's a project that you've been a major project manager, etc., you got to put on your flak jacket and your thick skin and realize there's some things people say that may not be fair. And quite honestly, they may not be true. They may be lots of things, but you need to keep it professional and make sure, don't take anything personally, that we're here to solve a business need and to help the business learn. So with that being said, I'll get into a little bit of just lessons learned in general and my perspective on this. Lessons learned has been around a long time. As I mentioned, I certified 1995, I PMP 10,000, whatever. Lessons learned was in the lexicon back then, and it's basically the knowledge gained during a project, which shows how project events were addressed or should be addressed in the future for the purpose of improving future performance. Now, it's kind of evolved and grown a little bit since then, but it's still the same idea. Something happened. Let's capture what we, quote, learned from it. And some of it may be reinforcement of learning we've already had. Others may be new things. Others may be something I thought in the past and I was modified a little bit. But all those things factor into lessons learned. And it's not just I learned, but we learned and created information in the whole knowledge bank that hopefully will be utilized as future projects similar, or not even similar, future projects are undertaken. So let me get into a little bit of the objectives of lessons learned in a project. By the way, when I first started, lessons learned was always considered an end of the project thing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I totally discount that. Lessons learned should be captured when you learn them. We've probably, in my career, I observed more things, lessons learned at the upfront planning, initiation phase to improve the project than anything towards the end. I'm a firm believer that 90% of the work up front makes it easier to do the work at the back end. And the good planning, good expectation setting, good roles, responsibility definitions, all those things will help facilitate delivery of the project to meet the objectives within the quality parameters. But the objectives lessons learned in general started out with is something formal. And they're traditionally done during project closeout near the completion of the project. Matter of fact, a lot of organizations have lessons learned after the project has gone live. The challenge with that is usually toward the end of the project, people are already on other projects. And so getting everybody back together to say, hey, let's talk about the project that's finished is difficult because they're on to other things. And the purpose, documenting to share and use knowledge. So you redo the good things, you avoid the bad things. And that's about as simple as it gets. What do we do good? How can we prevent something bad from happening again? How can we redo or maximize something good that happened? But more important for a distinguished project manager, it's helping build that skill set to be able to analyze a project and forecast things that might be happening and take proactive measures to avoid that thing from happening again in the future. I've said this many times, so kind of a lot of times nobody knows a good project manager is even there because they're not, the project manager should be promoting the team, promoting the work, not promoting themselves. And a lot of times things go smoothly in the background because the project manager has been proactive and avoided some of those things and established good rules, principles, all those things moving on. So the lessons learned is to help you grow and build and be able to utilize those skills going forward. And then I'm going to focus this also, it should be able to make a PMO better. I kind of the mindset that lessons learned are for a project management organization. Yes, we have our own individual lessons learned. It's called life experiences. PMI is a great term, expert judgment. That's using your life experiences, as I talked about before, being proactive in things. So you're building yourself, but the idea of lessons learned is to formally capture them for the organization to be better. And then it should make us all better project managers. So let me just give kind of a high level. I'm going to be pretty quick on here. This is probably similar to any organization's project lifecycle. At the beginning, you have project chapter, conception, initiation. There's a charter. Somebody, some process from somewhere sends down, says, we will do this project, and you as a project manager are given it, and then you go off and do these things. So you get this initiation, charter. I'm not going to get into some of these things. I have some very strong beliefs on some of these. Then defining and planning, I mentioned before about a lot of this is where a lot of lessons learned happen that we don't capture, but we should. And then we do launch, execution, performance control, project close. Now, this is kind of a rhetorical question, but if you wish, you can type in the chat. I'll give you a second or two. What's missing from this cycle? Hint, in conception and initiation, definition, and planning, how
There's no
have I
lessons learned.
absolutely. Where do we capture what we learned? Where do we actually spend time to say, okay, look at previous work efforts and say, what can we learn from here to maximize the good or reduce the bad? Now, I tell you, you go to a sponsor and say, hey, I'd like to spend some time to do some evaluation of previous projects, lessons learned, blah, blah, blah. 90+% of the time, you're going to get an answer. We don't have time for that. We already know what the lessons learned are. And if you don't know them, then why are you on this project? I've actually heard that, not to me, but when I manage a PMO, one of the people pushed back on one of my project managers on that. And it concerns me because the whole idea of lessons learned is so we can do better. And so we should spend some time, and that's going to be a common theme I have through here, is we give lip service to lessons learned. We don't have a well-disciplined, well, I say we, all the PMOs and so I've been involved in, I've been with 10 different organizations over my 30+ year career, have never had a real good process to quote, learn from lessons learned. So reason why I bring this up, this is like the typical flow. And then we have a project close. You notice here they mentioned project close. And this, by the way, I stole from this website out there on a blog on project closure. And usually we finalize the documents, we make sure deliverables are good. I'm going to skip this one for a second. We complete final closeout reports, we update processes, we hand off responsibility. Then there's one piece in here, we share and document lessons learned. I will say my belief is most organizations look at share and document lessons learned as a check on a checklist that we did it, and that we don't really capitalize them. We don't store them as true knowledge. We don't do lots of things with, but we probably have a session where we maybe have a bunch of notes. We throw them out in an electronic digital junk drawer somewhere, and we say we did lessons learned. Let's pat ourselves on the back, go to the next project, and never look at those lessons learned again. I recently started where I'm at in my current role, and mentioned about lessons learned. Where are they? Oh yeah, we do lessons learned all the time. I'm like, where are they? Uh, well, we think they're out on a SharePoint site somewhere. Why don't you go look at this SharePoint site? Like, okay, you don't really store lessons learned. You say you do, but you don't. You don't have them as a viable piece of knowledge to run the business, and that's a weakness. That's also an opportunity, a huge opportunity for us. So the other thing I've noticed on a lot of lessons learned, they're really something we should have known before we went in. I mean, kind of, in order for you to be in this job, you should have some level of competency and some skills and knowledge. And I'm amazed the number of lessons learned I see coming in that you really should have known. Where I'm really seeing all this, another piece of my life is I'm a member of the ACMP, which is the Association of Change Management Professionals. And they have a certification similar to the PMP called the CPMP, the Change Management Professional Certificate. And I evaluate examination applications. And one of the questions there is 2 lessons learned. And it's amazing how many of these lessons learned are something they should have known. I learned communication is important. Um, okay, that's great. Give me an example, and what are you going to do in the future to capitalize on that? Okay, communication is important. Okay, what's that mean? By the way, recent survey, I think from Gartner, I don't have the exact, can't quote me exactly there. Three most common feedbacks on lessons learned: too many emails, too many meetings, not enough communication. Um, emails and meetings are communication. It People just have different perspectives. A lot of times I've seen people say, well, instead of a meeting, this should have been handled in just a text message or an email. How do I know you read the email? How do we have feedback? We need to have the interaction. We need to have communication on this, full body communication, not just I read an email or et cetera. Because people may not agree necessarily with that was the lesson learned, or two, you may be overemphasizing it, or three, you maybe are not capturing how significant it was. And another thing I see a lot in these change management professional things, I learned stakeholder engagement needs to start at the beginning of the project. I don't know of any formal project management methodology that says start doing engagement at the end of the project. You should have known this again before you came into depth. So a lot of times it's lessons learned is reciting rote knowledge, basic understanding, commodity, so to speak. So I kind of ask them, why do you have this position if you didn't know this stuff coming in? Um, I just that's just a mental disconnect. I think cognitive dissonance is what we call it now in the 2020s. And what I really want to see is to address the problem. We tried this approach, and it resulted. We tried XXX, and it resulted in YYY. And I'm going to mention later on how I would like to propose. I tried with my project manager, my PMO, in their project plan to outline a lessons learned and what they were going to do in this project to either maximize the benefit of the lesson learned or avoid the problem of the lesson learned. And very difficult. I got a lot of feedback. Oh, this isn't worth my time, and other things. A lot of feedback. Hey, this is good. It made me think. And a lot of feedback where we started out energetic, but as we got into the daily grind of the project, it kind of fell by the wayside. So it needs to be a disciplined, continuous approach. That's why I'm a big believer, really like iterations, rolling wave, we called it before Agile came and other things. But occasionally looking at our project, analysis of where our project is and capture lessons learned then. And the other thing on here for an action item, we're actually going to regard user needs. We recruited a team to create an online survey. So not only is it just what am I going to do to maximize these lessons learned, but an action plan in order to make that happen. So let me jump into a little bit more about the challenges to effective lessons learned. And there's effective versus ineffective. We've probably all been involved in both. The biggest challenge is, I already mentioned, it's an afterthought. It's done at the end of the project. It's a checklist. A lot of times people have sent a representative or other thing, or they send somebody who's wasn't involved now just so they can learn from it. And so you maybe have a room of 10, and this was back when we had rooms face to face. Now my last probably 20 or 30 lessons learned have been done virtually, which is pros and cons there. That's not the topic here, but one of the challenges to make them effective is when it's done. It's really not a glamorous thing. It doesn't get much attention from upper management. I challenge the leaders of PMOs should frequently communicate something that was learned in one of the lessons. I'm a firm believer that a leader of a PMO should be sending out a minimum monthly newsletter, blog, whatever we want to say, thoughts, etc. And it probably would be nice if that mentioned in there one of the lessons learned they saw that caught their eye. Now, I understand completely. They're not going to be able to sit and read lessons learned 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but they still should have a pulse on what's going on. They should be asking their managers what are some good lessons learned, but we need to give it attention. we give a lot of lip service. So we provide the latest and greatest to help guide through all this and everything, but we don't recognize our successes or try to minimize our failures. And the reason for that also, a lot of times our failures are because of our ineffective processes and cutting corners and some of those things, not good principles of project management. And it sort of brings attention to that. And for the most part, we're nice people. So we don't like to, you know, do not nice things. So we sometimes glaze over some of that. So there's a little bit of transparency issue. Another, it's seen as a project management task. Okay, I'll go to the room. I won't write anything on a sticky note because that's too much work, but I'll tell you what it should be. And then you should capture because it's a project management thing. Big contributor to ineffective. And then how the sessions are conducted. Probably a lot of you have had somewhere in your training some rules on conducting a lessons learned session. You're even going to see one from me here aside a little bit later. But we really don't have a lot of good training on how to conduct lessons learned from setup to running the meeting, to analyzing the results of the meeting, and to be able to formulate an action plan moving forward. We just don't do that because we have, quote, more important, unquote, things to do. So until the whole organization starts to look at lessons learned as a critical component for self-improvement, we're going to be struggling with that. And then I mentioned before, but there's a political correctness thing. Unless somebody's vengeful, which happens too, there's oftentimes hesitancy to really delve into a root cause. Well, we don't do root cause. We just say, well, it was ineffective because, we didn't start till 8 weeks after the supposed start date. Well, why? I mean, you can almost start playing. There's a million tools, the 5 whys. Why didn't we start? Well, because the project kicked off January 1st, and we thought we'd have 6 people in this department, but we need to go through the whole HR process to hire them and everything. So we didn't even have anybody on board until March 1st. So we lost 2 months of the project up front. We probably wouldn't say something like that. We'd probably say something like, well, we got a late start on that. Big problems, big issues, not necessarily handled on an individual project piece, but the project management office executive group needs to be on top of those things. So here's some just guidelines in general on the lessons learned. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, some level set on project lessons learned, et cetera, then get into some of the other issues moving forward. I firmly believe, and again, these are size of projects. Some of these projects are small projects. I mean, we used to call them small work orders, SWOs, in one organization. Multi-month, multi-year projects, et cetera, are different than something that's a regular update. We do some sort of security update on our network. So that's almost an operations type thing, but it may be run by a project management group just to make sure the communications and all that are in place. So that doesn't necessarily need a big formal, but if we're implementing, say we're going from our current ticketing system to ServiceNow, that's probably big enough to require not just one, but multiple lessons learned. But when you have these, I firmly believe you should have a learn facilitator to run it, not closely connected to the project. It really makes it difficult for you as a project manager to both coordinate the meeting, run the meeting, capture all the notes, and also be secretary for people who think they're too important to write something down on a sticky note, to get clarification, to dig in, put things in a parking lot, correlate, et cetera. It's a lot of work. So if you can have a facilitator help all that happen, it makes it much easier. You need to be prepared for the meeting. You need to be able to seed some questions or put categories on how some of these things are. A lot of people think, well, we just do a round robin and say, hey, lessons learned, and go around the room, everybody have one. Then when they don't have any more, they'll say, I don't have any more. And that lasts maybe 1 or 2 rounds. Or somebody will say, well, what so-and-so said, I think that's the most important lesson. And they just move on. So you need to be prepared for the meeting. And with that, if your project and your organization has metrics, be able to deal with those. And that's why I say it needs to be current, iterative throughout the project. If you've had a 4-month-long project and you're meeting for lessons learned and you had a problem in week 2, the odds are good people aren't going to remember it real well, or they'll romanticize what the lesson learned really was, or they'll have been so glossed over that you're not capturing valuable knowledge. You need to set the ground rules and timeliness for discussion. Now, I don't have the slide here, but there's a term I really like. Those of you that are familiar with the Sesame Street character, there's a character in there called Elmo, an annoying, irritating little red thing with a squeaky voice. But I like putting Elmos in on meetings. What an Elmo is enough. Let's move on. We've talked about this topic enough. We aren't getting anywhere. I would use the cliche, we're beating a dead horse. We're just piling on, piling on. So people should have ground rules that we've talked about this enough, let's move on, and keeps the flow going. And you need to have some timelines for discussions. You need to have some rules around that. I like to use the analogy that doesn't necessarily apply to all lessons learned, but I was in a conference presentation where they, keynote was speaking, and there were maybe 400 people in the room. And time for questions at the end. And so there were 2 people running around with microphones for questions. And what the one person did is they gave the microphone to somebody else. And that person took and started walking with the microphone. And so my analogy, never give away the microphone, because then they have control. You need to be able to control that flow. And so the timelines, et cetera. And sometimes you're harsh on it, other times you're not, but you need to make, because once you've given away that control, it's very hard to get it back. So concentrate on 4 general areas. What went well? What didn't go well, or quote, had unintended consequences? And then if we had to do it over again, what would we do differently? And then what recommendations would you make for similar projects? Then behaviors or tactics that were successful or problematic, rather than the people who were successful and problematic. So get it away from the people and get away from the behavior, competency, skills, etc., of how it happened. Check the ego at the door type things. Those different pieces where it's not promoting yourself, because that's another thing that happens. People come in and say, well, because I did this, blah, 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 something happened. That's really not a benefit to contributing lessons learned. But again, the focus on the behaviors or tactics. Accept input after the session from some people who remain anonymous. There's a lot of pressure in there. I talked about psychological safety before. It's difficult for some people to go in there, and if their boss is in it and they want to mention something where their boss may not look so good, they may not want to say that. There may be consequences that they perceive, may or may not be real, or they may think of something the next day or afterward. They go to lunch with some people and somebody says, we probably should have mentioned this. And yeah, well, give them an opportunity to contribute after the session's done. And then guard against a bias towards negative or positive, because that's another thing that can happen a lot. Somebody says something negative and suddenly it mushrooms. People keep throwing on the negative, when it might have been a 1% problem and now we're spending 70% of our time on it. That's where a skilled facilitator comes in that's not so closely aligned to the project. But the organization has a responsibility here. And again, that's the ecosystem, the enterprise. You must have that trust. I use the term psychological safety. I'm not sure that's in here in these bullet points, but that's a whole part of psychological safety, is trust. That I can say things and it be trusted that it won't be held against me, that it'll be taken as my opinion and people will listen to what was said. You got to dedicate time to lessons learned. As I mentioned before, not only just the session, but the outputs, et cetera. And it should be something scheduled, and people need to go to it. It can't be I delegate somebody else, or it's just lessons learned. Everybody knows the lessons learned, or I'll send an email that says this is a lesson learned. It doesn't really say anything. They need to be participants. You need to spend some money on lessons learned. By money, I mean training people on how it is. Money to store them, money to organize them, money to teach people how to use them. There's lots of money needs to be dedicated to lessons learned to help improve the organization. And we need to start adopting lean value stream principles. And that's just the principles, applying that. And lean basically is be efficient, and value stream is what contributes value. We're not necessarily trying to turn it into a lean organization, but we adopt those principles for how can we streamline, reduce the number of handoffs, reduce the time in queue, reduce the wait, all those different things. And where does it fit in on a value stream? Continuous improvement, not just as an individual, but also as an organization. Organization must be open to things we're doing wrong. Now that gets a little hairy, because some people may think what's doing wrong is the right thing to do. It's just other issues, and those are probably true, and they shouldn't be resolved in the lessons learned, but the organization needs to constantly be looking at some of those things. And then lessons learned, an organizational event, not a project management to-do list item. And then use them to try and improve. Why are we doing this? Now I'm going to jump a little bit. Let me throw out a concept here. And I talked about this a little bit too, but I posed this to a director of a PMO once, and they weren't happy with me because I challenged their status quo. But what if at the start of the project, we do a reflective session from lessons learned from a similar project? What if we get people, we did project X a year ago. Now we're doing project Y, which is similar. What if we brought all those people back from project X for just one session to talk about some lessons learned? And it's like, all I heard was waste of time, resources, other things, blah, blah, blah. Not that we're going to dedicate anything to this. So this is something to think about, a challenge to executives in a PMO. What if we did something like that? What would be the pros? What would be the cons? And I've had that discussion. Like I said, a lot of times the cons you hear are waste of time, more important things to do, et cetera, et cetera. I rarely hear, well, it can help us learn and be better on this project. I rarely hear that. So that's a mindset we need to work on. Now I'm going to jump from one topic to another, and I usually do something here with a little bit of a transition. And since we just finished the holidays, so you guys see me on the camera and stuff and notice, yes, I do wear the red suit in December. That is me. I do mainly special needs, children and adults. I do some things for some other different charities. Not much time on my backstory, but I'll spend a minute on it. Grew the beard 15, 16 years ago. Kept it. My sister was at Zion Cancer Institute in Chicago, Illinois. We went there to pick her up for Christmas many, many years ago. Nurses teased her relentlessly about having Santa Claus for a brother. If any of you have ever been to Chicago, Illinois, you know that traffic is a nightmare there, just as in a lot of your large cities. And so they were teasing her about, yeah, Santa will fly you home, the sleigh, blah, blah, blah. We get Judy home, we have Christmas. She passed away 2 days after Christmas that year. It was kind of a calling. She had 5 kids under the age of 18. And so that was a calling for me to give back. I've been blessed. And I tell you, there have been a ton of things I've learned in that role that helped me as a project manager. So I shifted now from a little bit of what the PMO needs to do to talk a little bit about some different things and techniques I'll use for a term. These are some different techniques in lessons learned. Round robin stuff. I've talked about that before. Go around the room. What did you learn? What did you learn? What did you learn? Blah, blah. Butcher block paper. We put up a big or a whiteboard or whatever, give people sticky notes and put things. Yeah, you may have different categories on the butcher block. Butcher block of that white paper that, at least in the States, butchers use to wrap meat in. It usually comes in a long roll, continuous. Sticky notes, affinity grouping, dot voting, storytelling. All these are good techniques. I'm not saying which one, it's the most appropriate for the team that you have at that point in time. Now, I'm going to share with you a lessons learned template from an EPMO organization and a healthcare group I was in. This is it. I mean, this is what they gave their project managers. They literally gave new project managers. This is a lessons learned template. And I don't know. I'm not sure what we get out of this, but they do have a template. So they say we have defined lessons learned. The agenda, we talked about what went well. What do you do with this? What went well? How do you talk about it? I mean, do you say what went well? I mean, you just ask, you list your milestones. How do you do that? What can we improve? All these things, then categories. communication, culture, governance. And then I've seen this group work before, and tons of time spent nitpicking if something was culture or communication. Enough. Elmo, let's move on. It's irrelevant. It's just a category. And then what went well, same thing, but they focused a little bit more on that. Notice they didn't focus one for what could we improve upon, just what went well, and then their final thoughts. They're proud of this template. Like I said, they use it for all their stuff and everything. I've looked at some of their lessons learned, and they really don't have anything captured as far as what lessons learned. What went well? Well, our meetings were good. We had agendas for the meetings. I'm sorry, and as a project manager director, I did not evaluate people on if they had good meeting minutes, good meeting agendas. I evaluated them on how proactive they were at avoiding problems, how they handled situations when they came up, how they had involvement, participation. None of these things are asked here. There's nothing in here that asks, did you feel you were an active part of the solution? Did you feel you were transparent? Did you feel your contributions were listened to? And those don't always come out necessarily in a open meeting. So you got to build the rapport. Another thing in here, there's a basketball coach, he just passed away recently. A guy named Bobby Knight. He's a very successful basketball coach in the 70s and 80s in the United States. He's Olympic basketball coach, etc. He wrote a book, though, called The Power of Negative Thinking. I really like this book, mainly because his philosophy as a basketball coach, he didn't win games as much as he didn't lose them. He avoided the mistakes. He was prepared, and he was thoughtful of what could go wrong. So these are the things I think we need to get out of lessons learned. How can we avoid the mistakes? Not what was the mistake, how can we avoid it? How can I be prepared for things? And I love the cliche, expect the unexpected. Well, okay, that makes no sense, but it's funny. Haha, chuckle, chuckle. But be prepared. What does be prepared mean? And be prepared doesn't mean in a status report I can say red, yellow, green. It's an idea of looking ahead of what's happening, what I may be behind on, what's a little off the rails, or just intuitive things that are just, quote, keeping me awake at night, unquote, or things I'm just not comfortable about. And then thoughtful of what could go wrong. So these are some different mindsets going in. And I also want to just take a real brief moment here to bring in the idea of retrospectives and lessons learned. They are different, and I'm the first to tell you retrospectives are not just Agile. I'm not a believer in Agile or Predictive. I'm a believer in what's the appropriate tool to use at the time. And that we all projects are hybrid. All projects have some things that are Agile-ish, all things have some things that are waterfall-ish. And all things have iterations, and at the time the iteration, we should be looking at what's our objective or our goal for the next one? What's our skills, our analysis of where we are, and what do we need to do to make that happen? But we have these things, and you used to call them ceremonies in Scrum. I don't know how many of you are Scrum certified. By the way, another little pet peeve. Not all Agile is Scrum, but all Scrum is Agile. But the retrospective's purpose is held the end of an iteration. So it is presently scheduled at different parts throughout the project lifecycle. And for how the team can improve their processes. So retros are kind of for the team, for how can our quote Scrum team improve? But if we do it in a little bit more of a global, how can the organization enterprise improve? The focus is primarily on the team's internal dynamics, how it works together. And the format, they often involve a specific framework. They're much more visual and thought focused. I like the one Rose, Thorn, Bud. It's just a way you can put a happy face, a straight face, a frowny face, or whatever. But it's just kind of a rose is success, a thorn's an opportunity, and a bud is something we can improve in. But those are just so you can put lessons learned under those different categories. But then the format, again, with these is they're much more structured around discussion. Lessons learned. They usually take place at the conclusion and capture insights, experiences. Their focus is on a broader spectrum than a retro, encompassing successes, failures, enterprise-wide. And the format is usually documentation. There's oftentimes a formal lessons learned document put out. I've never really seen a formal iteration analysis document put out. There's notes and et cetera, the whole transparency, information radiators, et cetera, in the Agile world are communication moves. But we need to understand there's a little difference here, subtlety in objectives, but I am not at all against doing retrospectives throughout the life cycle, every iteration of a project. And that iteration can be a couple weeks, it can be a month, whatever you feel is important based on the project you're doing. We tend to lean heavily toward IT type project, but these can also be used for change management, process improvement, publication of knowledge, methods, procedures, et cetera, all those different things. So want to spend a minute on this. I kind of use retrospective and lessons learned together as far as an opportunity for us to capture what went well, what didn't. But there's still a lot of things we need to overcome. One of the things I have, stop rewarding the arsonist for putting out the fire. This is a story from back in the 90s. Working with somebody, and this was through a PMI event. There was a major manufacturer in the United States, and they were telling the story about how they had a network upgrade, and they were really frustrated. And their face was red. They were angry as they were telling this. They had a go live, and they had some issues. The go live didn't go well. Problem had to do with network, and they had meetings and meetings and meetings planning out project planning where the network people just wouldn't go, or if they go, they didn't participate, or they say, that's taken care of. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So they didn't do their job going in. Crisis time. All of a sudden, the network people jump in and they do these heroics, and they're getting all sorts of accolades or how great you were, how you saved the project by doing this, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? They were the problem, but we rewarded the arsonist for putting out the fire. We tend to do that in organizations. We tend to, again, reward a Herculean effort by somewhere along the line, belittling the other ones, and maybe rewarding for behavior that shouldn't have been rewarded. How do we overcome that? This is a PMO challenge. It's an enterprise challenge. That's where retros and that can help. We need to overcome giving it lip service. I mentioned that before. A lot of times you'll see, probably a lot of you are getting to the point where you're going to have a beginning of the year kickoff where whoever the head of the PMO going put some PowerPoint about these are our objectives this year, blah, blah. These are the value add we have. We perform lessons learned so we improve our processes. Then they go on, and you never hear anything again for the next year on on lessons learned as the output of our organization. We're not being real. And then we identify stuff we should have already known as a lesson learned. And we're not trying to apply something we learned. We basically take them all and throw them in the shelf and not do anything with them. So, question here, rhetorical for the most part. And I just see I did get an Elmo a little bit ago. Have you ever been trained on how to get project lessons learned to help improve your project? I mean, have any of you really ever had training on conducting lessons learned? You studied for the PMP, there was probably 5 minutes where you had a slide on what lessons learned, stuff I already covered earlier. And that was it. For the PMP exam, you'll need to know blah, 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 boom, boom, we're on to the next. But have you ever had a simulation where you actually got lessons learned, where you had to do that preparation, et cetera, or analyze lessons learned for what can I learn from here to apply to this project, or analyze your project to say what's the best way, my best iteration for the next goal? I would challenge that most people have not had that training, that it's been learned on the job. Hopefully you've had a mentor or somebody to help you. We need to have on the extracted learning, we need to know how to tag knowledge. We need to understand keyword searching for this type of training. We need to understand reasoning in general. Now, reasoning, thinking, these things have been around a while, and I don't know, maybe remember there was a hit 6 hats of thinking for a while. I tell you, when you're sitting thinking, you don't really care if I'm doing inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning, right? I'm just thinking and doing it. We don't need to spend all that time nitpicking on what type is it, but we need to understand reasoning in general. And then the next question, does your organization follow a specific method to applying lessons learned? And I've talked about that quite a bit. And my guess again is the majority of them are no. And if you have one that does, congratulations. I'd love to hear about it. I've yet to have anybody respond to me and I ask that question with an organization that has a very scientific approach to applying lessons learned. Now, I have had some that said, they're at the beginning, they have lessons learned, review lessons learned as a step in their project planning. And then when I ask them, well, how do you do that? And they kind of say, well, we just go out and we do a query in some files and that's it. Another example in the lessons learned is how do you say things? And this is back to my change management stuff. ProSci, which is an organization that has a project management methodology called ADKAR, says that there's research, 75% of project failures due to poor project sponsor involvement. Now, that's why they say you need a sponsor involved. Now, I can turn around that same thing and say 25% of successful projects can be attributed to active involvement of the project sponsor. You know which one's going to get more engagement? Is the bottom one. Because people say, yeah, I can, here that's kind of cavalier. Well, it won't be a failure to me, I'll be involved. Why here, you can be successful, only a short percentage have been successful, and you can have this discussion. How can you be more successful? So lessons learned incorporate how you say things too, especially as you're trying to get people involved and engaged on learning from lessons learned. And then I've already talked about this before. Improvement goals need to come from lessons learned. On this project, we're going to do this and hope to achieve something else. In your project plan, it'd be nice to have an improvement goal that says, we're going to somehow improve ourselves, apply lessons learned, et cetera. That one's a hard one to sell to people that have a time, because we've all been there where you give out an initial schedule and the first thing that comes back says, you need to move up to date. I didn't even look at it. You need to move up to date. I don't get the facts in the way of what I want. Hope we can get to the point where we truly have lessons learned as part of our continuous improvement cycle. Next slide, I just borrowed from Disciplined Agile, which PMI bought, I think 4 or 5 years ago. They firm believer in guided continuous improvement. I think your PMO or somebody, Project Management Center of Excellence, whatever, is there to help guide the PMO, which very few organizations have, but if you do, they help you do it. But the idea is start where you are and do the best you can and try to get better, not wait for things to be perfect. And what guided continuous improvement is that you have somebody to help you that you can talk to about that analysis you're doing, or what are some things we can do moving forward, et cetera. It's difficult to do that, quote, with your boss, unquote, because your boss is evaluating you on what you're doing and your results. However, if you have some sort of a mentor or a project center of excellence that can just discuss pros and cons, and maybe it's an hour of discussing things and you don't do anything different, you still have thought about it. That conscious effort to think about it will help guide you for continuous improvement. Now, applying lessons learned. So we talked about lessons learned. Now, what are we going to do to apply them? And I talked about before, the good PM can detect potential problems, take preventative action. But how can you detect that? Is from your lessons learned. The preventative action to take is from your experience of continuous improvement, your personal lessons learned. But how can the PMO benefit? Same thing. Capture and analyze those lessons learned. Teach the lesson to other team members. Wouldn't it be interesting if you had a PMO that once a month had 1 hour dedicated to talking about the lessons learned? I mentioned the executive mentioning them in perhaps a blog or something, but that we're consciously devoting time to having a lessons learned session. Tried that once. You know what happened? Everybody is overscheduling it. Oh, we're supposed to have a lessons learned, but this meeting's more important than this, so I'm just gonna miss it. And so it just didn't get attendance. and it didn't get support from upper management, like, well, they're right. That project is more important than that other thing. And our behaviors, our priorities, it's how we behave dictates our priorities, not what we say they are. And do we teach the lessons learned to other team members? I don't see that happening very much. But again, remember, the title of this is How Can We Learn from Lessons Learned? And these are ways to do it. And then cultural intelligence to influence behavior. A lot of what a project manager does is influence. Matter of fact, PMBOK Guide 7 uses the word influencer more than it does the word manager. Project management, a lot of it is influence of behaviors and decisions, et cetera. So applying, you got to understand the cultural intelligence. If you have a very authoritative organization, very top down, it's going to be a different approach than if you're a much looser, horizontal, very, very transparent organization. So you need to understand your culture to be able to apply lessons learned. Okay. Now, another thing that we should do. We get a bunch of ideas. After lessons learned, we should take some time. How can we come up with some actions and improvement ideas and actions that we can take about it? Let's say we got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 improvement ideas. Okay, what can we do to implement those improvement ideas? And you can map those to actions, because the actions can support the same improvement idea. And this is nothing more, I shouldn't say that, that's a wrong term, and that's another thing, nothing more is a diminutive way of saying something. This is a fairly simplistic exercise that has a lot of value, because what you're doing is you're taking the ideas to actions. And this isn't complex to put together, but we get an idea. Like, if I didn't know priorities, what are some things we can do to help people better understand their priorities? And one of these, create a team vision box. That's something, oh man, that may be a half a day. That's a waste of time. But what's the long-term benefit? Back to that iteration goal, et cetera. Say you're doing something to do with amortization of loan rates, and your developers don't really understand amortization as much as you want. You're in an Agile group, you're doing 140 story points in iteration, and you decide this iteration, I'm going to scrap the number of story points down to only 20, and we're going to spend that iteration to learn. Teach everybody on amortization, go through real life case studies, look through examples and talk with the experts, et cetera. So I'm giving up 100 story points for this iteration and maybe 100 for the next. After three iterations at 140, I'd have 420 story points after 3 iterations. But if I sacrifice the first, I'd learn more in the next 2. I may end up completing 400 story points by the end of the 3rd iteration because I spent time at that other one. That's an art. That's where that expert judgment and other things come in. But that's how we start to learn from the lessons learned. Another one, if we're working on multiple projects, what are some actions we can do on that? We didn't know my function in the project. What are some actions? And again, I'm not going to read these for you line by line, but just kind of an idea of several actions we can take. And we can have some control over how many actions we're really doing and map it back to what improvement ideas will be supporting this. Estimates for a task wrong. By the way, just a second, on time, on budget has nothing to do with project performance. It has 100% to do with how good you are at estimating. Because we don't know what the time frame is going to be definitively. We estimate based on our best knowledge. And hint, 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 2024 word of the year, AI is going to help us do that as we move forward. Visibility of workflow. What can we do to make it more visible? And here's, again, some actions. And then the quality of the product. So we have actions. So what we need to do is decide which of these actions are probably the most important and how's it going to contribute to all these improvement ideas. We probably can't do all of these. Matter of fact, the odds are pretty good we can't do all of these. And some of these are much bigger, like shared services and DevOps. That's organizational change stuff. You can't do that in a small team. But you're still taking the improvement ideas and actions and seeing how do they correlate with each other moving forward. And I'm also going to suggest here towards the end, and this is kind of wrapping up, we should treat lessons learned as though it's a production service problem I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Agile processes, et cetera, for service assurance, service delivery. And that, once the first thing to do is restore service, get things back, and then analyze root cause analysis, but a systematic problem solving to determine how to correct a negative. So say we have a negative from one of our lessons learned. What if we took time and treated that as though it was a problem in a production issue? Because most of your help desk, if you've ever been involved in the help desk, they have processes and procedures for doing this. A lot of times the project may have come from a chronic problem. Sorry, I was looking for the word chronic there. A chronic problem that shows up on the help desk. And so you're actually doing these things. But what if we focused it on a lessons learned approach? And I'm going to break that big picture down into two. By the way, the overview, it's on here down at the bottom. If you get the slides, you'll see them. But the problem statement, basically, there's some charts. Well, I'll go into that a little bit more. But using that approach of problem solving. So gather the relevant information, telling the story of data. So you get the problem statement, you have your graphics, your information radiator, so to speak, your metrics, whatever you want to say for visualizing the project. I'm a huge believer in visualization. Analyze. What does analyze mean? Do we really know how to analyze? Analyze is not just making a pivot table in Excel. I'm amazed at the number of people that I can do a pivot table and they suddenly say they have analysis. 27 of them are this, 20, that's grouping, that's Pareto numbers. But analysis is how do we get there? How did this situation happen? What can we do to prevent it? Or what would happen if we do something? So there's inductive, deductive reasoning. And I don't know if any of you have heard the term, the groan zone of where you go from a bunch of ideas to selecting which one are we actually going to do. But so you find the problem, you get the information, you visualize your process, you set a goal, and then you define a scope. So here I visualize what we're doing. From a process perspective, we set a goal, we define our scope, which means we've defined our problem that we're trying to solve, and then we go do it. And this, those of you that have any experience in Six Sigma, DMAIC, all those quality improvement processes, this is rooted in the same approach. Cause analysis, and you need to have an event to do a root cause analysis. I'm again surprised. Disclosure, we were doing the business analyst practice guide. We had a piece there where it's built around a case study of a home builder trying to improve their product. And we spent hours to point data. I threw out many Elmos of where they want to do the root cause analysis of why homes weren't selling. So, something not happening is not a root cause. I cannot have a root cause of a non-event. Now I can do causation and a lot of different theories on what is causing this, but in order to do root cause, I need to have an event. So you need to have a mindset and a certain set of skills and competencies coming in to do this. So once you've found your point of cause definition, you investigate the cause definition, 5 why. There's tons of tools, techniques, methodologies, et cetera, to do these things. Then you have the root cause, then you implement your solution, verify, et cetera. What if we did this approach to a lessons learned? Instead of, well, we had our lessons learned session, we put it out in digital junk drawer, let's go on to our next project. That's how we're going to improve, learn more from lessons learned in an organization, is to spend time on it. And it's a collaborative effort. So we need to be working together to achieve a common goal. We need to create something of value. We need to have everybody contributing. Nobody feels like an outsider. Check the ego at the door. Heard this story. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Apollo 13 mission that happened in the 1970s. There's a fancy movie about it. Going to the moon, they were doing routine stirring of oxygen tanks. It caused an explosion on the module, blew the side of the module out, and the 3 astronauts there, they brought them back safely. The flight commander there was a man named Gene Kranz, who I had the great pleasure of meeting at a professional development day in Denver, and spent about 20 minutes talking with him. What's kind of funny, he and I actually had a common denominator. We were both born in the same hospital, several years apart, but we had that thing, so we started to build a relationship. I don't spend much time on here, but probably the biggest factor in learning from lessons learned is building relationships with people and having those conversations, those off the record, osmotic conversations to learn. But he talked about his philosophy of check the ego at the door. And that was mentioned all the time. And he said, many times we would be, he liked to use the example that they had in the movie of the round circle and the square. How do we get this round cylinder to fit in this square intake? And that sometimes people would just get too carried away. And he would say, go get a cup of coffee, come back, check your ego at the door. It was understood to check the ego at the door was not a diminutive statement. It was not a slam. It was, you've maybe gotten a little carried away. And the best thing you can do for everybody is take a little break, come back, and be humble. Try consciously to be humble. And that was so important. And here I talk about collaborative effort. That's important in a collaborative effort. And it's also very, very difficult. Differences aren't just tolerated, but are celebrated. I haven't been in too many meetings where somebody says, man, I'm so happy you completely disagree with me. But we really do need to have that mindset. I accept you have a different opinion. I have some empathy towards that. Everybody's accountable for the outcome. Don't take that to a PMP exam where you're talking about RACI, because RACI has only one accountable person. But we all are accountable. Yeah, we're also responsible too to contributing. But we want to be the point where people feel to say they can say, I'm part of that solution. I contributed to part of that solution. My evaluation criteria for if I had a successful project, if somebody wants to put it at the top of their resume, they want to highlight that their greatest career achievement was delivering on this project. That to me is the biggest compliment I can have. Straight talk, candor, critical feedback is important. Now, I'm not saying harsh, I'm not saying negative, I'm not saying sugarcoat, but we need to be candid. And it does need to be tempered with how it's being said. We need to have empathy as we say it. And the whole psychological safety in those things. I mean, there's a lot more things that can be on this list. No bullies. The culture needs to support it. You need to make tiny steps to change the culture. It's going to be harder to change the culture than change anything else. Just like within testing, one of two things can go wrong. Right? It doesn't meet the expectation or it does meet the expectation. If it doesn't meet the expectation, it's defect in the product, defect in the data, or wrong expectation. You know what the hardest one to fix is? The wrong expectation. And then there's an old African proverb I pulled up here. And that's also, if we're going to learn from lessons learned, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's probably my single biggest takeaway for how can we learn from lessons learned is a collaborative effort driven from the top that takes baby steps, agrees with continuous learning, knows that there's going to be starts and stops and up and downs, but continually improve, continually improve, continue to improve. Don't treat something that didn't meet expectations as a failure. It didn't meet expectations, and learn from it, move on. So my recap. Lessons learned has to be a step in the PMO process, treated with high value, needs to have the whole enterprise involved. You need to have knowledge management. You need to have tagged data. You need to be able to get to data easily, consume it quickly, and apply it quickly. You need to train people on how to get wisdom from lessons learned knowledge. So this was PMBOK 6, this whole idea of information, data, knowledge, wisdom. How you approach your sessions, they need to be structured. It just can't be, oh man, I got a lessons learned session in 5 minutes. I just open the bridge and I'll just say, hey, what do we learn? And go from there. Those are not sustainable. So you need to have reflective learning, intentional learning, and then continuous improvement. Talked about those things. Retrospectives, talked about those throughout the project on how we can improve our process. And then we're constantly improving our communication, radiators, dashboards, etc. If you think everybody read the email you sent, you're probably making a very weak assumption. and it's okay to follow up. And yeah, sometimes people may be negative with you and may say things that you just need to put on your flak jacket and move on. Now, Winston Churchill once had a great quote. I'd never get anywhere if I stopped to throw sticks at every dog that barked at me. That's a big lesson learned as you go on improving organizational functions. And then another one, to map your factors to a process or to activity items. Those are some good activities. Shouldn't be done alone, but it still is utilizing the lessons learned. And that one slide I showed, if you could do that as one slide to send up to your management chain for something to, it at least gets them thinking about it, get some agreement of the importance of lessons. So I'll finish with a quote from C.S. Lewis, again, one of my favorite authors. But you can go back and change the beginning. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. So I thank you for your time. This is my contact information. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Shuhari, but give that really quick. That's actually was a Scrum term started, it got popularity in the last century. Shu is basically understand the current rule. This is the way how we do things. Ha is basically, I'm going to change the rule. I'm going to try something a little new, something a little different. And that gets accepted. So re is, it becomes the new rule. So that's how we can continue to improve lessons learned. Understand what we're doing today, make a modification for tomorrow. The modification is adopted and it becomes a new rule. So with that being said, thank you for having me. I see, do I have a real example on using lessons learned? Not to share at this point in time. I don't have one with this presentation. As far as from my story, vaults of stories, I could probably drag one up, but I'm not prepared to answer that question. But I will give you one here real quick that I'll go back to Gene Kranz and what he talked about when I had that discussion with the check the ego at the door. The lesson learned that he came away with is give everybody at the beginning of a day a chance to speak. It's sort of grown into the Scrum stand-ups, which is kind of going, but give everybody a chance to contribute, no matter where they. And he also was like, don't have a big group. If you do 50 people, it's not worth it. But keep a small group, and the small group, everybody have a chance to contribute. Because what you need to tell these people is you are of value. And you don't tell people they are of value by telling them they are of value. You do it through your behavior. So I'll put that out as my lesson learned real life example.
All right, thank you very much, Dave, for your insightful presentation here.
Okay,
So,
I will give you
yeah,
back. I'll stop sharing and give you back the screen. So
yeah, sure. Maybe we can have a discussion, and if there is a participant that would like to speak to you directly, we will be open for it.
okay, thank you. Give me a second to take a sip of my coffee.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's okay. So, uh, I would like to summarize that from your presentations. I believe in the typical PMO project management lifecycle, as you mentioned, that there is a missing link where we learn the projects after we running it, but you see that you explain that we can learn it before we initiate the project. So as soon as we want to initiate the project, it is better for us to learn. And learn from what? Learn from the previous projects. And I believe some of us maybe have an argument sometimes, oh, we don't have that kind of projects. We never do that. It is the first time of projects. But from your presentations, it gives us perspective that it doesn't have to be precisely identical project, but from the similar values, we can learn how to
Yeah.
maximize the lessons and prevent the same mistakes in the future. And I believe this kind of value, it is valuable for the organizations. But now lead to another questions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, what you
yeah,
talked about is known as analogous project evaluation. In estimating, you covered in the PMBOK guide about analysis project estimating, a project that was similar, an analogy can be made. But you bring up a great point. You know, how important is it? Does anybody really care? Some of those things. They're paying you a lot of money. There's a reason they're expending that money on you. So don't belittle yourself. I know this is so easy for me to say here, but I've been in those shoes where it's like, you go to a meeting and there's 5 projects, you're 5th on the list. There's only 4 minutes left in the meeting. So we'll cover you next time. Then the next time comes around and there's 6 things that come up and we'll cover you next time. You just don't get there. So there's that. And there also needs to be the psychological safety of being able to say, I don't get anything here. I don't see anything, or help me. I'm in a black hole here right at the moment. Help me, get some ideas. You need to have that core group of your group of trusted advisors that you can have those discussions with. Don't go it alone. And
Perfect.
again, your boss should be a great partner and et cetera, but you need to understand there's a line there. And a group of advisors he could be a part of, but not necessarily sometimes. He shouldn't be involved until later, or she shouldn't be involved until later.
I mean that's great. I mean, we should cultivate a culture that people in the work settings comfortably share their, difficulties when they have some problems or issues want to tackle. Like you mentioned that, oh, I need this kind of issue. Please, can you give me an advice? Then I believe that kind of environment, it is very impactful for the project to success. Now, this is a type of discussion also have a correlation with Eddie Novendra questions. Thank you for the questions. He asked about how we integrate lessons learned into project life cycles.
Yeah, I saw a couple in here about tools and et cetera. Quite frankly, where we're at now with tools, we write a Word document and put it out on a team site in my organization. We do not have a formal tool to capture lessons learned. You saw that template that I did from a previous healthcare organization, EPMO. That was their tool. They stored it in a PowerPoint. As far as something like, say, a ServiceNow project management utility or a Clarity or any of those things, I haven't been involved in one that had tools like that for years. And the last one I had was a product called Project InVision. They were one of the many hundreds of project management tools that went by the wayside through the evolution. And we didn't really use their lessons learned capability. It was basically a database screen where you could put in a question and then have people collaborative response. You capture different response, and then you had the conclusion. It's one thing it did have was a search capability because it's in the database, and it captured time. By the way, I've seen people use smart sheets. Let me get on my soapbox for that for a second. 2-dimensional world is great, but we live in a 3-dimensional world. Smart sheets is rows and columns. We need to configure that depth with time and other things. And that's another huge challenge. Because something like risk, it's a big risk at the beginning, but as we reduce the uncertainty, the risk should reduce, right? So the risk level in January should be hopefully down by March because we've learned some things. But how often do we really, seriously, how often do we really mitigate risk and have risk meetings and say, I mean, we have lots of lip service. Oh, we have a risk, but we don't mitigate them. We don't look at our trigger points, at least smaller projects I've been involved in. And bigger projects, when the risk shows up, they don't really want to talk about them because then they have to deal with it. So.
Right.
So I guess the answer,
is
and I saw it in here twice. I don't use a formal tool except for MS project tools. We've also used Miro. We've done some dot voting with Miro. That's one of the things I like. I mentioned before about collaborative face to face. I really like some of the electronic capabilities that came about with COVID and for just those sorts of things. People, I found them being more contributive to electronically put up a sticky note as opposed to, sit and expect somebody to be their secretary and write it down. Okay.
Okay, I hope answer that questions. So
Yeah.
we have another question from our fellow member Aditya Nugroho. He asks you,
Oh.
what do you think? Will it not be effective if we have a good knowledge management together, lesson learned, and maybe this is very, have a, I mean, this have a kind of correlation with your statement before.
Oh gosh, that's a great philosophical thing I'd want to talk about, because lessons learned should be an input into knowledge management. I agree the core needs to be good knowledge management. Lessons learned is one way to go from that data to information to knowledge. There's lots of other things, including what we should be doing with iteration analysis, performance analysis, earned values, all those different things in project management to contribute to to that. What's our single biggest cause for having to do retesting, for example? That's knowledge. Is that a lesson learned? Maybe, but there's probably a little bit different approach to get that knowledge. But I agree completely. The core value is knowledge and knowledge management. And management means getting it, storing it, retrieving it, knowing how to use it, and curating it. I could put out probably some great things on knowledge management about how to use X25 for a network protocol. Nobody's used X25 for 20 years, right? So what good is it? Hey, I can tell you how to use your BlackBerry phone.
So
A token ring, I
there is
love it, Johnson. You're a man after my own heart. Or get the red out. Remember, that was the whole purpose of Microsoft when they introduced whatever the Microsoft networking was Windows 95 was to get the red out because of, oh gosh, I don't even remember the network protocol that was owning the world in 95. I'm getting old. IPX. Yeah, IPX. Yeah. I'll come up with it about 2 o'clock this afternoon. So, okay. Well, people do have my contact information, right? So it's made available. I don't know what you're going to do anything as far as getting the screens available. I sent you a PDF of the screens. Full disclosure, I did a slight tweak on what I presented as opposed to screen. So if you want me to, I can send you the updated PDF. It has one slide that today there was a slide that's not in the PDF that had to do with the retrospective versus the lessons learned. So it came to me overnight that was a valuable one. Mainly because the lesson learned I had on a retro here this year already. The big thing is don't do a retrospective the day after New Year's. Timing's important. Novell, yep. I'm sorry. You've got me there. Jonathan, you caught me on a couple of them there. Oh, well. Okay.
okay.
Well, my workday is starting here. So I appreciate everybody spending time with me. Thank you for having me. And I found it to be very valuable input. The dialogue is great. Appreciate the questions.
All right, thank you very much, Dev. I guess there is no more questions from our audience also. So we can close these sessions, and please, for all the participants, turn on the camera. We want to take a picture together. Mas Rais, could you hear me?
Okay, wait. I will take the
All right.
picture. Please open the camera. Release full slide. Okay. Okay. Smile. Second side.
Okay.
Right. Another 2. There's 4 slides here. Okay, this is 1 slide more. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Dave.
you.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Dave.
Thank you very
Happy
much.
New Year and all the
You
best for
are.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night, everybody.
Happy New Year.
You too. From Joko, King of Kamang, to all my
Okay.
friends in PMI. Always the king, and have a good New Year. Thanks. Hey, Bison. Take care now. Bye.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Yeah.
Saya selesaikan ya ruangannya, saya tutup. Terima kasih semua.